We're going to take a look at how to properly align the axis on the Monoprice Delta Pro. This is X, Y, and Z, which is essentially moves the position of the nozzle. For this, we're going to need some isopropanol alcohol, paper towel, and your sensor. Alright, so the nozzle is above 200. That's plenty to be able to clean it. Just spray on some isopropyl alcohol. And then, as you see, the nozzle is going to be leaking filament. You want to clean all of that off. Anything that's already on the nozzle, just clean it off. You don't want to stay in one place for too long, as it'll get hot. This is just folded in 4. Get it nice and clean. Turn off the heater. And while it's cooling down, just keep wiping it. It'll help it both cool down and make sure that nothing more comes out. This will ensure completely flat nozzle. You can do this the whole time if you'd like, or just wait until it reaches about 180, wipe it again, and that should be plenty. While the nozzle is cooling down, now is a good time to clean your print bed. Just spray on some isopropanol alcohol and just wipe it off. If you have some sort of adhesive such as hairspray or glue stick, just scrape it off with a razor until you get everything off, and then wipe it down just by spraying it and wiping it down. You want it as clean as humanly possible at this point, because you're going to be doing the bed leveling process here in a little bit, and you want everything to be extremely clean. You also want to make sure all of these thumb screws are completely tight on every side. This next step takes place at this UI interface. What you want to do is go to the settings, go to the bed leveling, set whatever your offset is back down to 0, and then hit the center button, exit out of it, and then home. And exit out of this. It's coming down and it'll home itself. So that process is complete. You want to go in, double check, make sure it's still 0. Then go to the advanced settings menu, structure. Under structure, hit advanced settings. Under auto bed leveling settings, we go to the number of leveling points. Mine is set to 14, which is higher than the stock 7. I use 14 for a better number, but once you do this modification, this doesn't really play a huge role. Remove that, set it to 3. So now you have 3. Hit back again, and hit back again, then hit back again. Again, home. Home seems to do what home seems to do is save the settings. Some settings seem to save just fine just by backing out. Other ones you have to home it and it seems to save, which doesn't make any sense, but this is what happens. Anyway, so the next process is you want to heat up your bed to whatever you typically use to print. So if you're printing at 55, set it to 55. If you print at 65, set it to 65. I personally print at 55 because I use adhesive on the bed, which is a glue stick. So I'm going to turn on the heated bed and let it heat up. So you want it to not only heat up and reach the temperature, but heat soak. So let this heat for about 10 minutes. Attach the probe to the nozzle and then connect it to the yellow or the green wire. So just make a good clean connection. Your nozzle is already completely cooled down, and then you attach it. From here, you just wait until your bed is heated up fully and at temperature, like I said, about 10 minutes. While this fully heat soaks, I'm going to go ahead and explain what we're actually doing here. By changing the auto leveling to 3 points, it's basically probing directly under each axis. And that makes each axis be exactly parallel to one another and perpendicular to the bed. And so what you want is there to be no offset, since every single point that it's printing to begin with is mathematically calculated. Any additional variance that it has to compensate for is going to be problems. So when you're printing, it's somewhere out here. Even if you ran auto bed leveling, it's either too high or too low, or it's coming up or whatever. I don't run into that issue because I've fully squared the unit and aligned the axes. The way this works is at the top, this is mounted right here, the very top of it, along with the end stop where the axes go, and it touches. So this is what dictates the offset for each axis as compared to the actual bed. So at this point, it's fully heated, fully heat soaked, nice and stable temperature. You have installed your probe. The probe is connected. Everything is clean, ready to go. You go into the settings. You go into the bed leveling. It'll auto home. Again, make sure this is set to 0. You have to make sure this step is done. So when we hit auto level, it'll come down and it'll probe the 3 points. My previous offset was minus 3.8, and that was done about a month ago. So when it comes down and reprobes, you want all 3 points to be the same. They don't have to be negative 3.8, they just have to be the same. So touch the first one, negative 3.8. Touch the second one, still negative 3.8. Touching the third one, still negative 3.8. That means that they all align to the bed now. We know the bed was flat, so if all points are aligned to the bed, now we know we have a flat plane and all axes is aligned to it. Now say yours isn't aligned. What you're going to want to do is whichever, say you have 3.8, 4.2 and 2.7. That means this is higher than this, but this is lower than all of them. All the numbers should be negative. The further the negative the number, the lower it is from, basically the longer the axis is from the plane. It has a longer travel movement than the other axis, and you want to adjust for that. To adjust for that, you want to come over here and loosen these 3 screws. Right here, right here, right here. You want to take one axis, either pick one that has the 2 same numbers or the one that's in between the 2, and move everything from there. So if you have, let's say this was a larger number, that means we want to move it down. So we push it all the way down and hold it down with our hand while tightening these 2 here. Make sure they're fully tightened, then snug this one up. This doesn't have to be ultra tight. From there, just rerun the bed level and see what the new number is. It should be a different number. If it's not a different number, then from there, you want to take these 2, loosen them ever so slightly, and push down on the switch itself while tightening the screws back up. This is one of those things where you're going to have to finesse and do it a few times to align it perfectly, but trust me, this is well worth your time. I have never had bed leveling issues on this printer. I've printed some enormous prints, never any sort of problems whatsoever. And you want to just keep doing that. So you either move it up. Once you release this, you either move the things up or down to adjust the numbers to go higher and lower. And you just keep doing it and keep running the 3-point level until all 3 numbers are the same. Now you've run the auto bed leveling, 10 times, 15 times, 20 times at this point. I don't know how many times it's going to take you to fully align your axis. It's going to depend on how well you understand how this works. It's going to be a little bit of trial and error until you get it down. It's not really a science, but it is a mechanical part that you're simply moving up and down to make sure the end stops are the exact same distance apart from the bed on each side. So that makes each axis the same distance on each side. At that point, you'll want to just go back to the advanced options, structure, advanced settings, auto leveling settings. Change this 3 to whatever you want. Factory 7, I use 14. That'll give you a few extra measurement points, exit out of there, and then home to save. From there, you still want the bed to be heated, and then you run the auto bed leveling as if you were running it normally. It'll go through, it'll probe a whole bunch of points. The offset between all of these points will be plus minus basically 0.1, maximum of 0.2, and most likely those offsets are basically the probe being, mathematically calculated slightly off, which is okay. Whatever it probes, just leave it there, as long as all three axes before were the exact same number. So you start the auto leveling procedure, it'll probe everything, it'll give you the numbers, and again, you just sit there and watch it. You'll see how much closer those numbers are now than they were before, and it'll give you an idea of just how flat it thinks this actual plane is, because it's now fully aligned, and so the plane is extremely flat. Remember, when it probes, your heater pad is only on some of the a certain area of this, and not in certain other ones. So the corners may actually probe slightly different numbers due to the thermal expansion of glass itself, and that's fine. You still want it heated because you're primarily printing exactly where the heater is and the areas around it. Even though you can print in some of those areas, you typically aren't going to do it, so the numbers that it offsets it by will simply compensate for the difference. Here I started the bed leveling procedure. .9, 4, 4, 4, 3.9. So as you see, there's very small deviation. Alright, it's completed bed leveling. I was watching it while I was running the points. Almost every single point was negative 3.9 with a few at negative 4. Keep in mind that it does round the numbers that it shows on the screen versus what it'll actually measure. Like the accuracy it'll measure has a lot more digits, and it's rounding, so the numbers could be so small deviation versus what you think it is of just 0.1. I had 3.8 again in the corners themselves, and every other point in the heated area was 4 or 3.9. From here, you want to set the offset of the nozzle. The nozzle offset was pretty much all, if you have everything aligned properly, the nozzle offset is pretty much always negative 0.15, which is the thickness of the sensor, and that's your offset. That's what changes this number. And from here, you can double check it by hitting that number, hitting back. We hit home, it'll home, and then from here, go back into the menu, go back into the leveling, make sure it's saved, and you can hit the middle button, put a piece of paper or a feeler gauge underneath and measure it. This should be exactly what you want it to be. And you can do the same test in the other 4 corners, but it's going to give you the exact same results basically. So now when you're printing, you have essentially perfect layers every time. Now that this is completed, just a few notes. Heat the bed to whatever you print as far as temperature is concerned. I know 55 is safe. I don't know how much higher is safe for the plastic, but because of how quickly it hits and comes back up, I think pretty much anything up until maybe 90 is okay. I don't imagine a lot of people are printing ABS on these machines, so I don't think this is going to be a problem. Make sure your nozzle is clean. I don't know how, I can't stress this enough. It is extremely important that there's no plastic on the nozzle. It is extremely important. Another thing is, make sure the bed is clean. Even something like dust or lint or something along those lines can cause some issues, so you want to make sure everything is completely clean before you run the process. I hope this helps anyone who has bed leveling issues or just wants to get the most out of their printer. If you have any questions, I guess post them in the comments or in the Facebook group.